Hey everybody, it's Mrs. Gibson back with chapter 26 of Red Kayak. Shoes, soccer cleats, Office Depot, haircut. I stared at the list Mom had left under the seagull magnet on our refrigerator. She could scratch the haircut. I'd already had one, so I'd look respectable when I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. If I were like every other kid in the country, I could have focused on new shoes and school supplies. But 3 days before I started 9th grade, I went to juvenile court to testify against my two best friends who had been charged with second-degree murder. Mom, Dad, and Carl came with me. Mr. Anderson met us at the county courthouse. It was really hot and humid. It was really hot and humid that day. Stifling. And we were all encased in formal clothes. Mom in a dress, me in long pants and a sports jacket, with a new tie carefully knotted at my neck. My dad squeezed into a suit that was too tight, and even Carl tucked in a collared shirt. Because the air conditioning in the old brick courthouse wasn't on or didn't work very well, we all kinda stuck to those wooden benches in the hall while we waited, fanning ourselves with copies of a takeout menu someone had left behind. But what I remember most about that wait is not the heat and how I was still mustering the courage to stand up in front of everyone and testify without breaking down. No, I mostly remember feeling scared for JT and Digger, scared and worried about what was going to happen to them. We were scheduled to start at 9 a.m. At 10 minutes of 9, someone opened the doors for air, and I could see Digger and JT standing on the front steps with their families. If they saw me, I wouldn't have known. As soon as I spotted them, I kept my eyes averted and spent the rest of the time moving one foot back and forth and staring at a crack in the tile floor. I must have opened and closed my eyes and wiped my sweaty palms on my pants 100 times. When the courthouse doors inside were unlocked, we went in right away and sat toward the back. The Griswolds came in after us, and it really struck me how they had spiffed themselves up. Digger wore a nice polo shirt tucked into a pair of clean belted jeans. Even his father had a suit on, and I know for a fact that was a first for me. Their public defender was a young-looking man with thinning red hair. I know this guy, Mr. Anderson leaned close to tell us. He'll do a good job defending Michael. JT came in a minute later wearing a sports coat and a tie, but I'd seen him dressed up before, like on mornings when he'd been to church, and we ran into him at the 7-Eleven afterward. His mother was with him, but not his dad. After JT took a seat in the front row, I stared at his back. He had a fresh, close-trimmed haircut, which made his ears stick out. I wondered what he was thinking, and if he was scared. I wondered if someday JT and I would ever be friends again. We rose when Master Williams, "All rise," entered. Then we sat down again and listened as a man addressed everyone in court. "My name is Charles Fine. I'm the state's attorney, and I'm calling the matter of Jeremy Tyler and Michael Griswold, who have been charged with murder in the second degree in the death of Benjamin Anthony D'Angelo. It is my understanding that Mr. Tyler and Mr. Griswold wish to admit to this charge." A murmur rippled through court. Surprised and a little confused, Mom, Dad, Carl, and I looked at one another. Mr. Anderson grinned and leaned over from the other side of Dad to tell me, "You're off the hook, Brady. You won't have to testify." Carl reached across Mom's lap to pat my knee. It had not occurred to me that this could happen. It threw me. Master Williams addressed JT and Digger. You admit to this charge? You understand this means you plead guilty? Digger said, yes. JT nodded and mumbled the same. While I was reeling from the fact that I didn't have to get up in front of everyone and tell my story, Master Williams was asking JT and Digger, do you understand that by admitting to this charge, you give up your right to testimony on your own behalf? The boys nodded. Do you understand that, Mr. Tyler? Master Williams asked. Yes, ma'am, said JT, his voice barely audible, his head hanging, one hand clasped around the other behind his back. Do you understand that, Mr. Griswold? Master Williams asked. Yes, replied Digger, loud and clear. He stood up straight, with his hands at his sides. I wondered what had come over Digger. I'll deny it till the day I die. In the past month. Why didn't he want to fight it anymore? Do you still wish to enter a guilty plea? Master Williams asked again. I guess she wanted to be sure they knew what they were doing. Yes, ma'am, JT replied. I do, said Digger. Why? Master Williams asked them. The courtroom grew absolutely silent. Everyone's eyes were glued to Digger and JT. JT spoke first. Because I did it, Your Honor. Digger was shaking his head. No, he said in a pretty loud voice. I'm the one who's guilty, not JT. He didn't want no part of it. He kept watch, is all. Mr. Griswold, stop, please. Master Williams ordered him. Digger stared at her, and I could see him take in and let out a big breath. The judge lowered her voice. Look, she explained in a kinder voice. That's not appropriate here. I promise you will have a chance to say whatever you want later, but not now. She bent her head to write something on the papers in front of her, and attorneys up front started whispering because I guess Digger wasn't supposed to go on like that. But I'd stood up out of my seat. I was so moved by what he said, how he, too, had finally come forth with the truth. Mom tugged on my jacket, and I sat down. Then we waited a few minutes. I'm not sure why. When Master Williams spoke again, she turned to a man at the side of the courtroom and asked, Has either of these boys been charged with a crime before? That's the bailiff, Mr. Anderson whispered. He's got all their background information. The bailiff replied, No, Your Honor. Master Williams went on to ask JT and Digger a bunch of questions. How old they were, how much school they'd had, were they under the influence of drugs, alcohol, or medication? The state's attorney, Mr. Fine, stood up again. He announced that although the D'Angelos were not in court, they had written a victim's impact statement, which he would read. Let me tell you, it tore everyone up pretty badly. I heard Mrs. D'Angelo's voice behind every word. Ben was supposed to start nursery school next month. Now, there will be an empty cubby where he would have hung his Winnie the Pooh jacket. There won't be finger paint pictures to hang up on our refrigerator or birthday parties to prepare for anymore. The tricycle we ordered is still in a box in the basement. No more stories in bed. There is not a single moment goes by when we don't think of our son. I bit my bottom lip hard to try to stop from crying because I knew that the D'Angelos would never get over losing Ben. I knew from losing my baby sister that the pain gets a little less the more time passes, that you go on living and you learn how to cope with it. But it's like my mom said, even though Amanda died, she'll always be a part of who we are. At one point, when I covered my eyes with my hand, Mom suggested I leave the courtroom, but I shook my head no and took the Kleenex she offered. She squeezed my hand because she was having as hard a time as I was getting through the D'Angelo's statement. I couldn't see JT or Digger's reaction because my head was down the whole time. When it was over, everyone kind of needed a minute. I glanced up through watery eyes to see JT standing in front of the judge again. His lawyer, a woman in a bright red suit with thick jet black hair brushing her shoulders, stood with him. She and JT didn't look like they belonged together. He was taller than her, for one thing, and I hoped that didn't prove to be bad. Your Honor, I would like to begin by pointing out that Jeremy Tyler has never been in trouble with the law before, his lawyer began. As I'm sure you've read in the reports, he is a good student, a loving son, and a hard worker. Up until 6th grade, he was homeschooled by his mother. His grades at school have been all A's and B's. He is active in a youth group at the church he attends with his family, and every day in the summer he puts in a full 8 hours of work on the family's chicken farm. I felt a twitch in my back. I wanted to jump up and tell everybody that sometimes JT hauled out of bed at midnight or 2 a.m. and worked clear through the night because those chicken buyers collected around the clock. Your Honor, the lawyer went on, Jeremy was not a willing participant in this criminal act. He felt pressured to help his friend Michael Griswold. Even though Jeremy was present when Michael drilled those holes in the kayak and then replugged them, Jeremy nevertheless believed that the kayak would sink fairly quickly as a practical joke, forcing Mr. D'Angelo to take a cold swim in to shore. He did worry that they might get caught and have to pay to replace the kayak, but it never occurred to Jeremy that Mrs. D'Angelo and her young son might be the ones to take the boat out first, or that any actual harm would come to anyone. Of course he didn't want to harm anyone. JT had a good heart, the best. Your Honor, due to the fact that his father is seriously ill and in the hospital, Jeremy is needed at home. And may I remind the court that Jeremy is only 13 years old. We ask you to please understand that he is still in many ways a child, easily swayed by peer pressure. It's true. JT was just a kid like me. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. I wiped a tear away from the corner of my eye. All right then, Master Williams said. She tilted her head toward Digger. Mr. Griswold,